all those 800, 700 companies who are in this space have to necessarily follow these standards. So we're looking in that perspective, user protection first, within that innovate, and the burden is on you. If it doesn't work, the government can very well come up and amend, correct? And we have seen how they deal with the intermediary guidelines also, that something doesn't work, they are not shy of amending it and putting certain things in place, which will make the companies and the industry to sort of think as to what the next step should be. That's how we are looking at it.
No, that helps. Actually, let me build on that. And in continuing with the tradition of a multi-part question. Rutuja, I'm going to come to you. I think one part of the question that remains a little unanswered is that this, so I'm going to go a little bit more detail on the self-regulatory bodies and that approach and the registration element. Firstly, will it help with the the foreign betting and gambling issue that we face? Because one of the things that the government has been saying, there are a lot of sort of bad actors abroad who have been advertising and people are falling prey to some of these things. Will the element of registration with SROs help address that? And do you think that's an effective way of doing it? That's my first part, and then I'll come to others.
Thanks, Rohit. So I think before that, I think just a little blue skies gazing, right? There was a long-standing ask from the industry to have soft touch regulation to govern this space. I think it's a sunrise sector, it merits that kind of regulation. From that sense, having an SRB framework is good because it gets the power back into the industry's hands and tells them to figure it out and regulate your space. It is giving the power back into the gaming associations, for instance, to weed out the bad actors from it. And so if somebody has to be registered and has to be able to offer its game, the way I see it is, they will still have to go to the SRBs and get a registration done, have a certification on display on their platforms. And if the SRBs don't think they are falling within the contours of what just Dhruv said, right? It's an RMG offering a game of skill. If they don't have it, then they're not going to get certified, which means effectively they shouldn't be able to offer their services on their platforms. And in that sense, it, to an extent, definitely will be able to address that issue.
No, so that's a good point. But my other question to you would be that, as Dhruv said, the SRB has to take a decision. Isn't there a lot of subjective elements involved? What is legal, what is not legal? When the courts only have not been able to decide, and there's so much back and forth happening between the state government and the courts, etc., on what is legal, things get overturned. Is that giving too much subjectivity to SRBs, and can that lead to any kinds of challenges? Do you foresee that?
I think it's two things, and this is to Zera's point. So there are multiple formats, and Ludo can have 16 different formats, right? So there is nuance to how you want to certify even a game like Ludo. That is not something that you can regulate from a rules perspective. It has to go down to the nitty-gritties, and that is where the certification standards or the licensing framework that the SRB will come into play. Because it will be run by a set of industry folks, they will be able to have a better sense of how you want to certify a game and not certify a game. And that is the only way I think you should be able to do it. Whether there'll be subjectivity involved in it, yes. But it's too soon to say whether this is not going to work or work, because as we go forward and we see what kind of requests come into the SRBs for a certification, we'll know what kind of issues they face. And I think even the framework will evolve with time, because we also don't know so much that will come into their way, which we can't see at the moment.
Is the good thing that the rules give SRBs the place and the sort of room to sort of innovate, and even jurisdictional issues between states, etc., you are hoping will get resolved at the SRB level, or at least they'll figure out how to sort of allow something in one state and not allow in another?
So I'll answer it in two parts. One, I think the state part I'll take first. The way I see it is the rules will apply simultaneously to the respective states' laws, right? They will not overstep that, in the sense, if an SRB is certifying, say, a game of chess, for instance, or rummy, and if it is not applicable in Tamil Nadu, then the SRB's job is to just register and certify it. But it's upon the gaming platform to not offer it in Tamil Nadu because it's banned there, but still be able to offer it in other states where it is, or a similar format is allowed in those states. That's how it will pan out. Just because it's banned in one state does not mean that the SRB has to not register it at all, because it's still a fragmented approach within the states. And I think in terms of the way I see the SRB framework, I think the hope is that it should give comfort to the states that, there are these formats and we think these are legitimate, and therefore, when you are coming up with your respective laws or amending the existing ones, please take a look at the way the SRBs are regulating the space and they are framing their they're looking at licensing these formats and then take it from there. This, in a sense, should give them consistency in their thinking as the process would evolve.
Okay. No, that really makes sense. Actually, building on that, Shahana, I wanted to come to you. The deal is that there is an attempt to delegate some of that authority to SRBs, which obviously makes the system more agile. But also the way I see it, do the rules foresee multiple SRBs? Can that lead to sort of regulatory shopping, and is that a good thing? So maybe there are multiple SRBs, you are not getting licensed by one, you go to another. And also because there are so many subjective elements in certifying a game. Like, one of the things, if I quote, it says the SRB has to look at the track record of offering online games responsibly before giving registration to an intermediary. Can this lead to very different kinds of things happening through different SRBs? And will that sort of unlevel the playing field, so to speak?
I wouldn't go as far as saying that it would unlevel the playing field. I think in the short term, we're certainly going to see a variety of methodologies being used, right? So the fact that the government is going to rely on the SRBs and ultimately hold the SRBs responsible for the manner in which they're going to grant registration is a huge responsibility. The rules certainly foresee more than one SRB, and that's very likely to happen in this ecosystem. I think we're going to see, at least a couple of SRBs come up. Each of these SRBs is very likely to have its own methodology in place, which will, on the basis of which they will grant registration, right? Now, I'm not a student of statistics, but I'm assuming that there will be variance between these methodologies. I think there will be some short-term challenges around, some sort of arbitrage that is created across these SRBs. And, OGI is trying to leverage forum shopping to go to the most, or use the methodology that they believe would be most advantageous for that particular format. But I think, again, like Dhruv said, neither the government nor I think the SRBs would hesitate from fixing those short-term problems. I see them really as very short-term kind of teething issues when you have a new ecosystem coming into place. But be that as it may, I think despite the difference in methodology, I think in the longer term, we are going to see a move towards a more institutionalized, certification type of a framework, where I think best practices will be borrowed. I think there will be, some sort of, I don't want to say uniformity, but perhaps a standardization of the methodologies that are followed. And I don't believe that it is going to create issues around, long-term issues around arbitrage, etc. I think there will be settling down of what certain SRBs are going to follow. We might even see certain SRBs develop around certain formats of games, and so OGIs would go to that particular SRB for registration, etc. But I think what is interesting in the rules is that OGIs have no restriction from participating or going to multiple SRBs, right? And I think that's really important, especially for the smaller OGIs or for the startup OGIs, is that actually serves as an advantage for them. Right? That they are able to do that forum shopping, that they're able to go to an SRB that perhaps is, more open to innovation in a format that they have created, right? So I think it creates as many opportunities as it does challenges, which hopefully will be limited to the short term. But can I also just speak to your earlier point on the foreign gambling and betting? I think the challenge there is slightly different, right? Because I think there is clarity in the law. Like if you come to us as a lawyer and say, give us an opinion about whether these platforms are legal or not, they are not. The challenge is that they're still able to leverage the loopholes in Indian law and advertise on TV when IPL is going on, right? I'm still able to access those platforms sitting from India. And when I earn or when I win something, I'm not always able to bring those winnings back into my Indian bank account. So the challenges there, I think, are a little bit different. And I think this ecosystem that is going to get set up may address that to a certain extent, but those challenges are different. It's more about how do we ensure that those platforms are not being advertised over here? How do we ensure that how do we protect our Indian users from financial fraud that is happening on a platform which is essentially in the UK, for example? So I think those challenges are a little bit different.
No, that makes sense. And by virtue of registration, requiring registration, I think you would stop some of these. And I think there's also that element in the rules which says that before another intermediary can do advertising, it needs to check with the SRO of the registration status. And I am guessing that if it's, say, the Google Play Store, you will maybe have APIs eventually that ping an SRO database to check whether there is a registration before something is allowed, right? So, no, so that's a fair point. I'll actually go to Saloni now. And Saloni, just building on what Shahana said about multiple SROs and the SRO having, see, I think the difference is that in the case of, say, some other self-regulatory bodies that are envisaged in law, like the intermediaries, etc., here the SRB has the power to deny market entry because it needs to register you, right? So do you foresee any challenges for smaller players? And I ask this because even though the rules say that the SRB has to be independent at arm's length, is there a risk of capture bias? Because ultimately these are being set up by competitors, right? Even if you delay somebody's market entry, the incumbent can have a lot of advantage. And in fact, I was also told yesterday that you have to submit a lot of details to the SRB to get approval. Are you revealing certain IP in the process? And then can that have any implications? Sorry, I think you're on mute, Shubham.
Sorry, yeah, I couldn't unmute myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, look, the SRB framework, on the face of it, is a positive development, and it gives, let's say, power back to the industry, but the devil's in the details, right? There are a couple of things that come up. One is, what will be the composition of the SRB? Now, the policy framework does attempt to define the composition and the participants of the SRB, but you're right. What if there's competition? If you're a new, let's say, incumbent aiming, new disruptor aiming to dethrone the incumbent, and you've got the incumbent sitting on the SRB, are they inclined to, let's say, not certify you, which then hence either delays your market entry or to some extent even stops it? So yeah, this is definitely a consideration. So I think the first challenge here is what is the composition of the SRB? In this way, the fact that you have multiple SRBs to some extent mitigates that risk. The second is obviously what happens in the case of, let's say, one SRB doesn't certify you and the other does. Does that stand? I presume there is no clarity in the framework, but the rationale of having multiple SRBs would to some extent provide that comfort. The third, obviously, is the applicability of the SRB in terms of just the ability of the company, the effort of going through the SRB process, right? Is there a possibility of maybe having a certain degree of a threshold? Maybe the threshold can be, once you're a certain size, once you've processed a certain amount of transaction volume, once you've hit a certain number of users, and hence at that point of time, the SRB becomes applicable. And our recommendation is that, if you are to, let's say, and regulation is always, needs to be balanced by the fact that you need to regulate an industry, but also not stifle innovation. Our recommendation is that why not have some kind of threshold beyond which a company needs to go and register with the SRB, and hence it kind of reduces the compliance burden, hence reduces the risk of at least clamping down on innovation. In that sense, is that once it reaches a certain size, then it needs to go through the SRB, and needs to have those frameworks. The threshold can be as low or as high as the government or the regulator determines, but perhaps that is one way of kind of mitigating many of these risks.
So, Saloni, just to ask you another question, following up on this. So, in some areas of licensing regimes, there's this regime of general authorization, wherein you lay down certain principles and you say that this is what responsible conduct is supposed to be, and you don't stop anybody's market entry as long as they sort of work with the
Absolutely.
general authorization, and somebody can come and complain if you are not sort of doing it. And then
Right.
you register only later. My concern comes from the fact that the SRB actually has the power to stop you from entering, right? So would you prefer something like that? And also, I currently don't see in the rules and appeals process, except for the SRB shopping,
Yes.
there is nobody, you can't go somewhere and say that I've been wrongfully denied this. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and this is this is really a critical point. One is to lay down the conduct and the contours of, let's say, what responsible gaming looks like. What does a user protection look like? What does KYC and due diligence norms looks like? And, then and having every participant in the industry adhere to that. And the second is the certification, which essentially determines participation in that market, right? We're all for the former. In the form of the latter, we believe there needs to be some kind of threshold. The rules should not apply to every participant, whether it's an incumbent or whether it is a new market entrant, right? Because this will be a very, very big deterrent in at least promoting market entry. So, I completely agree. And I think that's potentially a recommendation because, for example, the AIGF does a great job in essentially providing a framework for operators to operate. Now, why not make that an open framework for all market participants to at least adhere to in terms of, good conduct and responsible gaming? But at the same time, when you have to go to the SRB level, the SRB for, let's say, certification, there is a certain threshold that gets implemented, whether it's in gross transaction value, whether it's volume of users, but there has to be some kind of mechanism which doesn't basically cause a deterrent for new market entrants.
Great. No, thank you so much. That really helps. Dhruv, coming to you, any suggestions? And I mean, she also referenced AIGF, for instance. Any suggestions on how? One, what do you think of these suggestions, and how can we make the SRB model more robust? Are there any lessons from other approaches in India or potentially abroad where something similar has been tried?
Sure. Yeah, Rohit, so Salone's sort of recommendation is quite interesting in that sense that we think that there might be certain things which should be, or even in these rules also, certain compliances could be sort of taken up only after you have reached a particular threshold. Like for example, like a chief compliance officer, correct? In significant social media intermediaries need it, not everyone. Same thing could be done for this also. But in terms of, let's say, the certification process, so let's say it's registration process, as the rules put it. I'll take your points one by one. First, something, you talked about IP, correct? So I'll tell you my experience right now. So let's say under AIGF, if someone comes, they submit you a legal opinion, robust legal opinion, one or more, correct? So, and in that it enumerates the rules of the game, the gameplay, etc. That you can, if you play it, you'll know all that, correct? So it's already public information. You don't share your code, correct? No one, I don't think so, any SRB will take that burden of asking you to give your algorithm to them, correct? So in that sense, concepts are not IP, ideas are not IP. So that way, in classical legal sense, I don't think any SRB will ask you to share your IP, correct? It is not happening right now, won't happen in future. So that's not a problem. But I agree that idea also, first movers advantage is there. So a solution could be that let the game be launched, have a 3-month or 4-month or 6-month period where they can go to the SRB and say, the game is running, we will supply you with data, we'll supply you with legal opinions, we'll supply you that we are in compliance, and in that time, you register the game, correct? If, let's say, there are problems, you let us know, and within those 3 months or 4 months, we'll change them, correct? We'll come to that. So what will happen is, post-launch, so that the person doesn't have to worry that, oh, while I'm waiting for the registration, can someone else steal my idea and launch it, correct? That won't happen. So that will give that comfort, and anyway, in terms of IP, no one, so what maximum an SRB can ask? Your compliances, legal opinions and analysis as to why it's not betting and gambling, correct? Maybe a statistical conclusion that more experienced player win more often, correct? That's a good way of statistically showing that, it's a most likely a game of skill, correct? All these things are not IP, so you don't need to worry about it. If it is post-launch, then you don't need to worry about that, oh, someone else can copy it. So that kind of a model can definitely work and takes care of these concerns. And as Saloni said, that maybe above a certain threshold, certain compliances can be applied to only those significant intermediaries. In terms of one more question, I think about offshore, I think you were interested in answering the offshore. And you have asked us a few times, and I'll tell you that we have been working directly with a few ministries and agencies to stop that. You must have seen now, you won't see on OTT platforms, streaming platforms, these offshore betting site ads are not coming, correct? And we can tell you that we have been going to the government, asking them to do this a lot, and there are fruits of that. There are still certain issues like influencer marketing and team sponsorship that are still there. I am assuming in few months you'll see that also going. But if you want to know what these rules do for that, I'll give you an example. So when we go to the government or the influencers or teams that don't take these offshore guys, why are you doing this? It's illegal. They ask us, sir, how do we differentiate between a good game and a bad game? They don't care about scale chance. They don't care about that. Good and bad is what they understand, correct? How much cost will it take us to do that due diligence, correct? What these rules are doing, they are saying that you have to have a demonstrative mark on your games. So now that basket of, oh, this is fine, this is not fine, the cost of due diligence goes down for all these guys. So they can take that moral responsibility, and also maybe let's say the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, or maybe in that sense, can take from these things and in their guidelines can attach, that's fine. This is a sort of a regulation from MeitY, you can take guidance from this and don't follow that. So that offshore betting and gambling thing, at least from the advertisement perspective, can be taken care of. The rest of the things in terms of whether blocking and all, I think MeitY, blocking and the financial models, the flow that they follow, that is a slightly more tricky conversation that we can have the next time.
No, that's a good point, and I'm sorry for so many sub-parts to my question. It's a complicated issue, so I'm trying to squeeze in as many as I can. But I also wanted to ask that in this space, and just a follow-up question to you, the main tool that the SRB has registration, but it doesn't have any other powers per se to penalize or anything, which none of the other usually self-regulatory bodies have. So do you think there needs to be something else also that they have, or will registration or the sort of, so to speak, the registration as a proxy for licensing do the trick?
So how I see it is that because there's a grievance redressal mechanism, at least in the rule, I'm assuming someone or the other will point it out. And once they point it out, it will first go to the company can sort of resolve it. If they don't, the SRO, it will come to SRO. And that's the time when the SRO can look into it properly, correct? And I think that's a good way of not giving too much power to the SRO.
But the deal is that what is it that the SRB can do even if the company doesn't adhere to the direction that it has given? So let's say there is somebody who needs grievance redressal, complains, it's not internally addressed at the company's level, comes to the SRB, SRB issues an order to the platform or the intermediary that do this, but the SRB doesn't have any power except for saying, I'll deregister you. So that's a high bar to put pressure, right? So what will happen then? If the intermediary doesn't comply, it'll go to GSE. So, and you think that model is fine?
I mean, again, as Rutuja said, it's too early to see how it will pan out, but I am assuming that most of the companies will know that it's in their self-interest until unless it's an existential issue to not blow it out of proportion that it's going to the GST, correct?
Okay,
like look at the OTT model, correct?
Correct.
I don't think so the interministerial committee that they have on the third tier, I don't think so they are getting any complaints to that level, correct? Because most of the complaints are taken care at the tier 2 only. Right?
Okay.
And I think that's a good, as you were asking other models that are working, I think that's a good model to see that it might work. Also look at ESRB, correct? So how ESRB, the content rating system, the game rating system in US, correct? It's a fantastic model. It has been replicated across the world, PEGI and ESRB. And they are self-regulatory bodies. They sort of rate their games, age rate their games, and it is successful, and it's being sort of copied by everyone. So I'm saying there are ways, because you have to understand, there are inbuilt checks and balances. The companies don't want to delegitimize their industry. The SRO doesn't want to sort of not deal with it properly. So everyone, it will check balance each other, correct?
Can I just add something to that? I think it's a fair point that there is no grievance redressal or an appellate mechanism within the SRO framework, but there is a nuance in the rules where they say that the SROs have to submit a compliance report to the ministry, basis which the ministry can decide often whether they want to issue blocking orders or not. So there will be some sort of capturing of that data that this is a bad actor, this is not a responsible enough actor within that compliance report that the SRB will prepare. That could be a teeth that some sort of teeth the SRBs can have over its existing members.
Got it. Yes. Sorry, there's a question. There's a mic there, so you can pick that.
I think what's important with our kind of industry is, particularly since it's a sensitive industry, and I'm not saying sin industry, I'm saying sensitive industry, very deliberately, is not just to be kosher, but to be seen to be kosher. Yeah? And therefore, some of the suggestions that are being made for thresholds, etc., I think, one bad apple can give the industry a bad name. And therefore, and also to the point that, like the OTT industry, there is a consistency in the kind of people who are there. You know, there are certain size, there's a uniformity in the OTT industry. The various players, whether it's Netflix, etc., have a certain standard. Here you're going to have a very diverse bunch of people. And therefore, I'm a little concerned about talking about thresholds, etc. I think we need to be seen to be kosher and be kosher, and therefore not allow some fly-by-night operators, etc., to come and muddy the waters and the image of the industry.
Fair. No, that's a good intervention. I have just one or two more questions from the panel, and then we'll sort of open it up to the audience. Zara, I wanted to come back to you on this grievance point also, that can you just help us understand from a gamer's perspective, what is the grievance process that's been laid out? Do you think that will work? And there is also this requirement of India-based officers, even from foreign gaming companies. Do you think those are the kinds of requirements that are needed to address some of the issues that gamers typically face? Or
Yeah, so I was really happy when they said that there would be a grievance body that we could all talk to and explain things. So because when you look at again gaming, it's such a broad term, and I'll give you a very simple example to kind of tell you why this is so important. There was a time, I think about 3 years ago, where there was a game that came out. It was called The Blue Whale, okay? And it was a crazy game. You saw, and when you say things to deposit to win, there people were doing tasks which were unbelievable, or things that you couldn't even imagine to achieve the goal of winning the game, right? So when you think of it very precisely, there are a lot of ways that games have been made to be addictive, right? To make you do something extra. And that problem comes when it's a game that is getting catered to kids and getting catered to the age group of, say, I would say 13 to 18, who really kind of don't know the difference between what's bad and good, right? And that's where age gating is required. For me, I believe the rules have to be very strict for that age group. So it has to be anybody below the age of 18 should have very strict rules put across. And if it's not done, then you're going to see even worse cases come out tomorrow. Because there is no other body that will say that this game is just wrong, This is wrong. There is no need for a big discussion also about it. There are certain elements in games which only can be noticed by people who play games and understand the long-term problems that it could create. Apart from spending 8 hours, 9 hours playing, you're investing so much money into it. You're investing, your whole behavior changes, right? So my major concern when this was discussed was just that, when we talk about how strong the rules should be, the rules should be strong till the person is 18. If they are logging into a site, do we need KYC? I would say it should be. For kids who are logging into sites, what games they're playing, it should be monitored. We should be knowing what's happening. Because tomorrow we are the ones who need to answer to the parents. If something goes wrong, they're going to come and say, but you guys said it was okay, right? Which is why these regulations are important. On a very basic level, talking about how it affects real money gaming and things like that, this is very positive just to bring some amount of safety in the whole ecosystem. And it's not only kids, even adults. I don't think a lot of adults even understand the variety of titles in the industry. What are the long-term drawbacks of getting involved? Is it clearly mentioned when you log into a game that this could be addictive? Please be careful. Don't invest too much money while you're playing the game. This is, after all, an entertainment sector. So I think with the whole space of having these rules put into place for kids, making sure that there's safety for women in the industry, making sure that this is very clearly stated on websites, and even if there's still an issue for someone who's above the age of 18, there's a place they can go and discuss this. They could put out what happened, they can state their issues, and that can be then seen to by the SRO. I believe they are one of the people who can also say, okay, I think this can go ahead and be placed for a larger discussion.
That's a very valid point, and I think the Blue Whale example is a very good example to sort of put it into context. It had really sort of caught people by surprise, what was happening. So I think the rules do sort of lay some of these things, put responsibilities on SRPs, and that will help. If I can go to Saloni, and I just wanted to understand though, still is there a need for a little bit of risk-based compliance, this thing? So ideally, yes, that, we need to sort of protect users on the platform, and I completely agree with that. But can we do it in a risk-based way so that it doesn't overburden all intermediaries, especially the smaller players? So Saloni, my question to you is that, do you think that some of these compliances, especially say India-based officers, stuff like that, and multiple officers that are needed, there is even a rule for A1 which requires all intermediaries to respond to government requests in 24 hours. In the normal IT rules, this deadline is 72 hours for social media